Today, I want to discuss one of the most important drivers, if not the most important driver, of state behavior in the international community, the pursuit of hegemony. Have you ever heard the phrase great powers inevitably seek hegemony? This idea was popularized by John Mearsheimer, who founded the theory known as offensive realism. However, similar concepts can be found across almost all major civilizations. Many scholars, commentators, statesmen, and political leaders frequently refer to this idea, whether to study it, warn against it, or oppose it. In my previous video, I demonstrated that politics is the science of acquiring and using power to control others, or at least to acquire the ability to control others. Hegemony, therefore, can be defined as the status of having acquired such control or the ability to control others. In other words, the pursuit of hegemony may well be the ultimate goal of all political actors. Actors in international politics are no exception. If anything, the anarchic nature of the international community makes international politics more primitive than domestic politics. Given this, it is not surprising that the so-called pursuit of hegemony has formed the basis of many realist theories, although there are disagreements among them. All realists seem to agree, however, that the main reason for states to pursue hegemony or greater power is to achieve national security. At the risk of oversimplification, here are the essentials of the three most important and relevant realist theories in this regard. First, Hans Morgenthau, the godfather of modern realism, argued that states, like individuals, follow a universal human trait. Individuals prioritize their own interests, and states likewise prioritize their national interests. The national interest invariably demands the acquisition of more power. On the other hand, Kenneth Walsh, the founder of defensive realism, believed that the central goal of all states is survival. In an anarchic world, states cannot rely on any external force to ensure their survival. This task falls to them alone. Finally, John Mearsheimer argues that states tend to pursue hegemony because the international community exists in anarchy and states cannot ascertain the motives of other states. The surest way to achieve security is to maximize one's own power, which inevitably leads to the pursuit of hegemony. Now, having summarized the prevailing theories, I will present my thoughts. In my view, all states strive to achieve security, prosperity, and autonomy in that order. Since the dawn of civilization, the international community has existed in a state of anarchy. There is no higher governing body to regulate and discipline the behavior of individual states. There are no collective resources to provide relief to disaster-stricken countries and to public authorities to police the international community. Therefore, survival of the fittest inevitably prevails in the international arena. This does not mean that survival of fittest is the only law of the international community, but in a world where there is no leviathan to regulate the behavior of the jungle, the only thing we can ultimately rely on is self-help. In the end, the international community is governed by power dynamics. What is the strongest motivation that drives countries in the international community? National interests, of course. These include both tangible interests, such as resources and territory, and intangible interests, such as security. Every country tries to maximize its own interests, given its limited capabilities and resources. There is no inherent reason to refrain from undermining another country's interests if it benefits one's own. In such a world, the short-term goal of any weak country is survival. Once survival is assured, nations seek prosperity. But even when prosperity elevates a country to great power status, concerns persist. The international community comprises many great powers that can directly or indirectly undermine a nation's autonomy. A country must continually work to defend its interests against other powers that could threaten its stability, prosperity, and autonomy. Whether these efforts are peaceful or confrontational, interactions between states are, therefore, inherently competitive. Consequently, all sovereign states that constitute the international community exist in a constant state of struggle. The pursuit of maximizing one's own interests and preventing the encroachment of others may seem like a never ending process. There is indeed an end to it. This endpoint is to become overwhelmingly powerful relative to all other powers in the region and to be recognized as such by these powers. Once a country is strong enough to overwhelm and control all its potential competitors, it no longer has to worry about whether it can realize its interests or whether its interests will be unfairly undermined. This state of affairs can be defined as hegemony. Not all great powers are capable of achieving hegemony, but it is hard to find a great power that would not seek it, given the capability to achieve it. This is because the essence of hegemony is the promise of survival and prosperity. Therefore, as long as all states seek survival and prosperity, all great powers ultimately end up pursuing hegemony. The most important element in becoming a hegemon is undoubtedly military power. Without it, another great power could challenge the hegemony by force. Therefore, military power is the primary force that establishes and maintains hegemony. However, once hegemony is established, the hegemon does not always need to maintain military power exceeding the combined strength of all countries in the region. A great power can achieve hegemony when it has perfected and implemented a system that ensures its survival and prosperity over all other powers in the region and can maintain that system consistently. In other words, once hegemony is established, the hegemon's main task becomes maintaining the status quo. In fact, for a hegemon, expanding its sphere of influence beyond a certain point may actually undermine the established hegemonic system. If we examine historical periods when great empires ceased to expand, even though their heyday was far from over, we observe that such points often coincided with periods of stable regional hegemony. This pattern is evident in the cases of the Roman Empire, various unified dynasties in China and India, the British Empire, and more recently, the United States. It follows that one of the key characteristics of a hegemonic state is its pursuit of stability. While the hegemon would thoroughly suppress, if not destroy, any country within its sphere of influence that seeks to challenge its dominance, it generally offers peace, prosperity, and protection to countries that conform to each order. In an anarchic international community, if there is one entity that would voluntarily and proactively provide police power beyond its borders, it is likely to be the hegemon. This behavior aligns with its desire to maintain hegemony because failing to do so would result in the hegemon's loss of legitimacy and potentially undermine its position. Indeed, hegemony is not just about power, but a combination of power and legitimacy. After all, hegemony is a form of relationship. A hegemon without legitimacy will face constant challenges and resource drains in maintaining control, ultimately undermining its longevity. Therefore, acquiring hegemonic legitimacy has traditionally involved securing and maintaining peace and prosperity within the hegemon's sphere of influence. It is worth noting that throughout most of human history, peace and prosperity have been considered a fair bargain in exchange for autonomy. This traditional notion seems to have survived the decades-long liberal international order led by the United States and remains relevant today. Non-liberal democracies, notably China and Russia, are indeed attempting to restore their authority within their traditional spheres of influence. Their approach aims to establish a hierarchy within their respective regional systems, echoing traditional forms of hegemony. Russia's approach is more subtle, avoiding official declarations while asserting influence over former territories of the Russian Empire or Soviet Union. They consider these regions exceptions to the prevailing international norm that all sovereign states are equal. In contrast, China is more overt in its strategy. It openly distinguishes between big countries and small countries, reminiscent of its ancient tribute system. Many Chinese scholars and commentators publicly advocate for neighboring countries to accept a traditional East Asian hierarchical system with China at the apex. This aligns with China model ideology, which offers an alternative to neoliberalism in a new world order. In contrast, liberal democracy presupposes equality in international relations. This means that its hegemony can never gain legitimacy in the traditional sense. The establishment of a hierarchical system would be inherently illegitimate under liberal democratic principles. Consequently, a liberal democratic hegemon must redefine its notion of hegemony to ensure its rule can be validated within its own ideological framework. As such, the United States sought to rebrand its global hegemony as global leadership. To justify this characterization, it adopted a more lenient approach than previous hegemons in history. After World War II and the Cold War, respectively, the United States established a global system that opened the doors for its allies and other non-hostile countries to challenge its rule within the confines of this system. As long as such challenges adhered to the rules that maintained the system it had built, the United States treated the challenges as business as usual, at least until relatively recently. However, in areas where the U.S. national interests were more directly involved, the United States often behaved more like a traditional hegemon than a leader. This discrepancy fueled negative sentiment against each rule. Despite being often characterized as the most lenient hegemon in history, the United States' rule has generated significant and widespread opposition around the world. The exercise of hegemonic authority inevitably meets with nationalist opposition from affected countries. The greater the scope of the hegemony, the more widespread the opposition. As the first truly global hegemon in human history, the United States has faced this challenge on an unprecedented scale. But just as the moon goes through phases, all hegemonies eventually decline. If there is no potential hegemon ready to take its place, the declining hegemon may settle into being one of several great powers. However, if a rising power emerges while the current hegemon still holds on to its dominance, conflict becomes highly likely. In this case, the declining hegemon may react strongly to the perceived threat, making a major war between the two increasingly likely. Graham Allison refers to this dynamic as the Thucydides trap. On the other hand, conflict can also arise when a rising power realizes that its chance to challenge the dominant hegemon is slipping away. In such situations, the rising power might decide to act quickly, challenging the hegemon before that opportunity disappears. Hal Brands and Michael Beckley call this scenario the peaking power trap. Unfortunately, this is where we find ourselves today. The global hegemony of the United States is fading as China rises to its traditional superpower status. Fearing the loss of its dominance, the United States sees China as a threat and is increasingly applying pressure from every conceivable angle. This situation could potentially lead to a major conflict. Meanwhile, China is also grappling with increasing economic and political challenges. Many analysts believe that China's chances of military success in the Taiwan Strait will rise through 2027 but will likely decline thereafter. As a result, there are concerns that China may feel compelled to take bold military action around that time. The developments that unfold between now and then will undoubtedly have a profound impact on our lives. This is why I refer to the current era as the hegemonic transition period. I will revisit this topic in future discussions, offering more specific context and insights. That's it for today. Please support the creation of more content by clicking the like and subscribe buttons. See you next time.